Hey, welcome everybody. Welcome back for episode 4 of Lessons from Terrible Students. We are the Terrible Students. My name is Jeremy. That's Dr. Tara. And you may notice, hey, we have somebody else on here. That's Sarah over there on the other end. So we'll introduce her in just a little bit. But I want to welcome everybody back to episode 4. Today we're going to be discussing project managers and kind of what their role is, what they do. Why I love them so much, because they make it where I don't have to talk to as many people. But before that, I do want to say that this podcast is brought to you by Lumius. At Lumius, we are your partner in learning. Okay. Now let's jump into it. So Sarah, welcome. We're so glad to have you with us. You're one of our favorite people. So we definitely, when we started thinking about people to bring on this podcast, your name was very close to the top. So welcome to the podcast. What I want to do to get started, I'm going to put you on the spot. I'm going to say, like most of us, you have gone from, we're going to call it instead of the SME to ID process, you've gone from SME to PM. So please, if you wouldn't mind, introduce yourself and tell us how you've made kind of your journey into your role that you have now.
Absolutely. So first, let me start with the feeling is mutual. I love you guys just as much. And so to get started on my journey, I like many people in L&D, kind of fell into the world of learning and development. I worked for a software company, and I was working on the escalations team, and quickly became a subject matter expert in what I was doing. And then when I really started getting into the job and supporting, frontline agents, it kind of transitioned into kind of the training world, right? So I became a liaison for my department and our L&D department. So they would use me as a resource for.
That's such a better word than what I use. Every other episode, I'm like, I was the go-between. Liaison. I got to remember that. That's such a better word. That sounds so much better.
Really, they used and abused me for their benefits and squeezed whatever they could from my brain. That's really the capacity there. But no, I started out as, a subject matter expert in what I was doing. That transitioned into training classes. That was probably some of the most fun I've ever had in my career. I got to travel to the Philippines a lot. Our partners were there, and just had a lot of fun there, learned a lot, lots of growth. And training then transitioned into, hey, don't you want to build some of the content for us?
Bum, bum, bum.
Yeah. Who uses resources from other teams knows exactly what I'm talking about. So that was really my start. I started dabbling in instructional design. I wouldn't even say I knew that that's what I was doing at that point. I was just putting, my knowledge into PowerPoints and, learning aids, job aids, that kind of thing. And then I actually, I was like, hey, let's make this official. Let's put a ring on it. And I joined the actual learning and development team as a training specialist.
We have had sort of a music theme through our titles. So
it's true.
Putting a ring on it might be, I don't know.
See, I know I made an NSYNC joke at one point. I don't even remember what the first one was, but
that was well, number 1 is Waterfalls. Number 2 is NSYNC. Right. I don't know that we've come down to a song title for the third one yet, but
we haven't. Just that the main poll from episode 3 was cow poop runs downhill. That's just remember that. So, okay. Go ahead, Sarah. We interrupted. I apologize.
Yeah.
Sorry.
You're good. So yes, I basically, told them that they should commit to me. I joined the team on L&D, became a training specialist, and that really encompassed everything. So I was still, a subject matter expert in my field, but I was going and training the classes. And in between that, I was, updating the content that I was going to train. So I enjoyed that, instructional design. I am not, my strong suit, however, is not staring at a learning module for hours and, focusing on that. Neither of you are unfamiliar with my ability to focus on things for a very long time, which is like a lot of learners, I just want to say. So yeah, I actually wound up leaving the company I was working for, and I wanted to come back to the East Coast. I, at that point, was living out in Texas, and I missed my family and my people, and, life happens. And so I took a huge leap of faith, convinced my fiance at the time to both quit our jobs and move across the country to the beach. And it actually worked out well for us. I wound up getting a job with one of our partners, actually, from the job I was working at as a project manager. So it all kind of came full circle. And quite honestly, I feel really fortunate to have had that journey, because it gave me a great perspective from every angle. It gives you the understanding and patience, working with SMEs who want to give you all the information, because I was that SME at one point, fought tooth and nail, no, we have to have all of this. And then just, having the lens of, hey, I have to get in front of a class and train this content. So, and then understanding all of the work that's put into it by instructional designers and really what good learning content looks like. So, for me, it was just kind of this natural progression into project management for learning curriculum.
Awesome. Yeah. And I mean, it worked out for us too. I enjoy working with you in your role, and in all the projects that we've worked together. You've been fantastic. So I appreciate it. Now, I appreciate that. Before we dive deeper, I do have a caveat before we get into kind of what you do in your project management role and all that kind of stuff. That caveat being, in many companies, the instructional designer and the project manager are the same person. I've done this as an instructional designer. You just heard, like, Sarah had done this, Tara's done this. Anybody that's been an instructional designer more than likely has had to wear both of those hats before. Here at Lumius, we are extremely lucky that we have separated those two roles into two distinct roles. So my role and Tara's role as instructional designers is different than Sarah's role as a project manager. So I know that a lot of people listening to this may have to do all of this in their role. I've been there. I feel you. And I just wanted to point out that here at Lumius, we are very lucky that we're able to separate those two, because a lot of times that is, they can both be full-time jobs. There's just a ton of work that has to get done. So I just wanted to provide that caveat before we start diving deeper into kind of what Sarah does and how she does it and why she's so great at what she does. So with that, I'm gonna start off with this. If you don't mind, Sarah, if you'll give us kind of a high level on kind of your role in a project, kind of that project life cycle of, where your world starts, who you work with, just the typical things that you have to do throughout the life cycle of a project, from kickoff or pre-kickoff or whatever we end up calling it, all the way to that 7th final version when we finally hand it over to the client. So just, can you give us like a high level run through of everything you kind of touch on through that process?
Absolutely. And I will just kind of reiterate how lucky we are at Lumius to have, a dedicated project manager, because I have been in the role, right, of instructional designer and project manager and facilitator for that matter. Yeah. And it is possible, people do it all the time, but when you start getting into these huge projects, you're trying to scale them, and you're also managing other instructional designers and other pieces, graphic designers, whoever, quality folks who are editing and checking your work. It can get very difficult, So I feel like we're lucky at Lumius to have our team the way it's set up. All right. So project life cycle. What that looks like for me is I will meet with whoever the sales person is that has acquired this project. And I'll get the details on it, right? Who the client is. If there's someone new, I like to do research into their company, learn about their culture. All of these things kind of help not only the project itself, but as a project manager, building the relationship and gaining confidence from our client is so important. So I like to go in armed with knowledge and to be able to speak intelligently about whatever their business is. So I do my own research, and then I will reach out to the client and say, hey, introduce myself if somebody I haven't worked with before, and get the kickoff initiated. So at Lumius, we have a really good kickoff process, and it is very thorough, and we like to make sure we tee up the kickoff meeting by making sure that am I including all the right stakeholders? Do I have the right audience on my invite? And then I like to give a little bit of a peek at what we're going to do. So I'll put maybe some objectives of the meeting or an agenda. Nothing too crazy. And then
so you're actually starting the analysis early. Like you've already done research, you're figuring out stakeholders. So you've started analysis before, because at this point, and correct me if I'm wrong, you still haven't even assigned an ID to this project. We don't even know what we're going to need, how many we're going to need. So you, as the project manager, you're already doing some of that instructional designer analysis right off the bat.
So, and yes, that's actually a good point, Jeremy. So sometimes, and it depends on the project, sometimes we do a very thorough analysis. Sometimes we have a completely separate project that is an analysis before we even jump into the actual creation of the curriculum. And so in that instance, this life cycle that I'm giving you an example of, this is without a full analysis beforehand.
Gotcha.
So analysis would be part of the initial conversation. And actually, once I find out who the client is and what the project is, a lot of times our operations team will have a good idea of who the instructional designers are going to be. So Tara, Deb, they're really good about resourcing and making sure that we have a good fit. It's not just about, throwing IDs at a project. It's about, hey, does this instructional designer have experience with this topic? Are they a subject matter expert? Sometimes we get really lucky and our IDs, like you, Jeremy, are subject matter experts. I think about, our previous projects with some of our clients. So in that case, sometimes I get the freedom of saying, deciding who I want my IDs to be, which is great. Usually we're pretty aligned there, actually, you know, when we have an idea of what that is. But so I guess before the kickoff, I do try to have an idea of who the ID is. And that is because they need to be a part of that kickoff as well. And also, our IDs like to do research into who the client is. So, you know, just kind of bringing them along on that journey from the very start. So at this point, project has been handed over to me. We've identified who the instructional designers are going to be. I have a good idea whether we're going to need things like voiceover. Is this going to be an e-learning? Is it virtually instructor-led training? Is it just instructor-led? You know, that also wheels start turning in terms of, oh, I've worked with this graphic designer before and they've been really good at this type of thing, technical training, you know, so I know that, hey, I'll maybe proactively reach out to them and say, hey, I've got a project, it's lining up, and, you know, I think you'd be a great fit for it. Check their availability and say, you know, I will give you details once those are nailed down. So I line up the kickoff, make sure I've got all the right stakeholders, the right people that need to be in that kickoff. I do, and again, it depends on the project, but I like to include in that initial kickoff, not just the stakeholders who are going to be making decisions and signing off on things, but also their SMEs, their approvers, their people that are going to be involved in the project. I like everybody to be at that initial kickoff. Now, a lot of times we'll also have maybe a follow-up meeting after that. If it's a big project and we are very reliant on their subject matter experts to give us the information that we need, we'll dive a little bit deeper into that conversation and what reviews look like and that type of thing. But in the initial kickoff, we'll talk about making sure we're aligned on the project, the deliverables, length of the course. We talk about start to finish, our dates, making sure we're all aligned there. Is there any wiggle room? If not, I like to reiterate how important it is that deadlines are met in terms of review cycles, because that can really throw a project off when things start to get behind there. So we talk about that. Really, we go through the entire, review process, what our design process looks like so that they're brought along on that journey. Trying to think what else.
Can I ask you a question?
Absolutely.
Sarah,
Okay.
At that point in the project, do you have the plan already in place, like the detailed plan of every phase, or are you still working from a higher level?
So great question. At that point, I have been given a list of deliverables, and I know that they are going to be specifically, an e-learning or whatever type of learning or, training module they're going to be. So I do have a project plan set up at that point. However, it is not 100% complete because I like to make sure in that kickoff meeting that we are 100% aligned on the deliverables, the length of time each one is, and just all the details. I have found when I spend a lot of time before that kickoff on the project plan, sometimes I wind up having to go back and make several changes. Because
you're not saying people change their mind, are you? That doesn't sound right. That
never happens. No. People don't change their mind. People aren't left out of conversations.
We always have exactly who we need right from the beginning of the project.
People are there. What?
Right.
Everything. Yes. Each project just starts out perfect. every time. It's great. No, but really, right. It depends, our clients, they are busy just like everybody else. And that's why they're bringing us in to help them. And so a lot of times you'll find that maybe there was somebody missing from an initial conversation, or a subject matter expert was missing from a conversation, and maybe a module that we were scoped to create is not even necessary, So, to answer your question, Tara, I have a high level project plan put together, but that is with knowing that I may have to go back and make changes. So I won't show the project plan during the kickoff, because in our kickoff deck, we do have an example of what our Smart Sheet project plan looks like, the dashboard. That's Smart Sheets is great for that. It gives visibility for our stakeholders. And so we make sure that we've got a good picture of what that will look like for them in the.
Yeah. And I'll jump in there. So Smartsheet is our project management software that our PMs use. They are not a sponsor of the podcast. Hey, if they want to be, reach out, we'll talk. But as of right now, they are not a sponsor of the podcast. That's just one of the tools that our PMs use. So just throwing that out there. Sorry, interrupted you. Go ahead.
No worries. Yes. So I will. So our kickoff, right? We've got our stakeholders confirmed. We have our dates confirmed during that, start to finish. Is there any wiggle room, or is the date a hard date? There's no going over it. Just, that's not a possibility. What happens when review cycles or certain things, are late or delayed, and how that impacts the final date. Sometimes, if I like to set the precedence that if dates are shifted significantly, that also shifts our scope that was initially discussed. So we talk about that. We like to, I'll present what our development cycle looks like, so everyone is aware of that. We align on what does a review cycle look like for you. Typically, we like to give our reviewers 3 days. That's standard, to hand off a prototype and say, hey, can you give us your feedback and review in the next 3 days? Sometimes I would rather have a realistic conversation at that point of, is this going to be doable with your team? Yeah. Right? Like, I
absolutely.
know
100%.
We hope that that's going to work, but realistically, if your SMEs are also trainers, or if they have a day job that is not reviewing content,
which as we discussed in the last episode, they have their own responsibilities they have to deal with. Yeah, absolutely.
Exactly.
Jeremy's out in a truck. He has to make a special arrangement to go look at something on a computer. So we have to think about that.
Right.
Right. Well, and we actually have
true. Yes, yeah. It's true.
I mean, absolutely. A good bit of our clients are their SMEs are in the field. They're doing
exactly
their job. So yeah, absolutely. I think that's a huge part, is making sure that they can hit some of those dates.
Yeah.
So,
and not just from the stakeholder perspective of course we can, but no, hold on. You can, but can everybody look at it in those 3 days? It's like, yeah.
It sounds good. Yeah. It sounds good. But we hope to do this in 3 days. Hope is not a strategy. Mm-hmm. Right. So
that's a good title.
Hope is not a strategy. I love that.
Well, yes, absolutely.
And so, like a 90s R&B song.
There we go. We're going to make our own songs by the end. Now the wheels are turning. Thank you, Jeremy. I'm going to create a R&B song called Hope Is Not a Strategy.
Hope is not a strategy.
But yeah, so, just being realistic. And I find in those meetings when you have all the stakeholders, it's good to have the SMEs, their leaders, who decide whether or not they are, what their availability looks like. Because, the director over here may not know that this SME is going to be in training for the next 3 weeks, teaching a class. So it's just a good opportunity for everyone to get aligned, right, on expectations. So we talk about the review cycles, and then what else do we talk about? I think for the most part, just going over what our strategy is and how we develop materials. We talk about what is prototype phase, what is beta, what is, why it's so important to get feedback during the prototype phase, especially when it is significant changes, because after that, we are going to move forward with things like having voiceover recorded, or, diving really deep into creating videos. So really at that point, if we have to go back and revisit some of these things, which happens, then we're talking about a scope change. And so or like our clients like to call it scope creep. So that's something they want to avoid. That's something I want to avoid. As much as I enjoy smart sheets, I can't say that I love going in and having to change dates on every single deliverable after all of that is, plugged in. So just kind of setting that expectations with everybody, making sure everyone's aligned, and then talking about next steps. And I'll, kind of share with them what their dashboards are going to look like, make sure that they understand who, and we understand who is the final decision maker, because that's really important. Sometimes they haven't talked about that internally yet. So that turns into a conversation in our kickoff meeting.
Hold on. Are you suggesting Are you suggesting that SMEs could come to something and not agree with one another? What are you talking about?
Never. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's something that is not typically listed out in a project management's like listed duties, but I think really finding those spots where they may not even know that they don't know something, like really bringing to light what the client is not aware that they don't know about. I think that's something that Sarah, I've seen you do it in the projects we work together, and I've seen our other project management people do it as well. So I think that's a big key, especially this early in the process, is really starting those conversations, getting them talking to each other. Because you're absolutely right. A lot of times this is the first time all of these people have been on the same call talking about the same thing. So it's really interesting how much, and we've harped on communication a good bit since we've started this podcast. And I think that's the key is getting them all together at the beginning and saying, this is the goal, and hashing that out. I think a lot of things come to light through that conversation.
Absolutely. And you'll be surprised to learn that that's not the first time or final time that those conversations come up either.
Well, I think that, we encourage, what I would say is if I was a SME that was being asked to participate in a development project, and I don't know if I'm speaking from the position I'm in now, but I know that if you want to keep your reviews smooth and you want to keep them moving on time, it pays to meet internally and go over what comments everybody has and get your areas of contention worked out before you hand it over to your IDs, because all they're going to end up doing is looking at this like comment conversation that's happening in this document, and they're going to be like,
Yep.
who's right? And that's when you have to escalate it to somebody, to a decision maker who, as we've discussed in previous episodes, might be a supervisor or someone who hasn't been in the field in a while, and they may not know the answer, or they may give the wrong answer. So it's like, meeting and getting some of those things like taken care of before you hand it off to your ID is a huge help. And I know that part of what you do, what project managers end up doing, is having to chase down those final answers from people.
Yes. I say that when people ask me what I do for a living, I say that I herd the proverbial cats. No.
So let's dive into that a little bit. So we've talked about like, the pre-research and the kickoff and all that. So, okay, now our project is kicked off. We've got IDs going. We've got our stakeholders identified. We've got our SMEs identified. Everybody starts off aware of their responsibilities. What's next? So you've done your kickoff. You've done a fantastic job, as you always do. What's next?
So I will say that 9 times out of 10, because this is the first time everybody is gotten together internally, from a client perspective, there is a very strong chance that they still need to decide some of these things that were discussed in the kickoff. So that's usually not it. In a perfect world, you'd walk away from that kickoff and all of those things would be decided upon. There'd be a plan in place. However, many times they will table that, if you will. Mm-hmm. They'll go and meet internally. And it's, you don't know what you don't know, as an organization. Yeah. And a lot of times you'll be prepared the next time, right, that you're going to do a project and have some of these things ironed out. But a lot of times there will be things that they need to come together internally, make some decisions. And then I like to get those decisions in writing. So that's really important from a project manager perspective. It's nothing, personal or against, clients or stakeholders, but people forget conversations sometimes and decisions that were made. And so I like to make sure that if there is a decision that needs to be made, that when they do come back, everything is documented well in an email, and we have, an actual sign off from the powers that be. So,
do you think that's also important, Sarah? Like, say that there's someone who was on vacation when the kickoff happened, and they come in, 3 weeks later and are like, well, what about this, this, and this? And if you're able to like show the receipts, if you will. Oh, sorry.
Yeah. For those not watching the video, I am cracking up over here because we had literally that exact problem on one of the larger projects that Sarah and I worked on recently. Somebody was on vacation when they made the plan and came back and said, "Whoa, this is not what we need at all. Let's start over," even though we've already done all this. Yeah, just toss the hand grenade into it. So.
And you know what? In all fairness, we covered our bases. We did everything that we knew to do. To our knowledge, we had all of the right people. That Absolutely. Is just an instance where it was out of our control. You know what I mean? Yep. But that's what happens with projects sometimes.
It happens.
That's why you have a manager. So in that case, you pivot. And you Ross Geller it, you pivot, and you either decide, sometimes if the team hasn't spent a ton of time or put a bunch of hours into what the original plan was, we can easily, say, okay, let's step back, we'll do this approach. But sometimes it really does. It requires a scope change. Then that's my job to, go to the client and say, hey, this was our original plan. So-and-so was missing. Now we're here. This is the new direction. But we've already put this many hours or whatever that looks like, right? We've already created this many modules, this many prototypes or whatever.
Right. And for those people listening who don't think that happens after you've already created other things, it happens after you've already created other things.
Yeah, it happens all the time. And
yes.
I'm firmly in the camp of like no project ever goes completely 100% to plan. Like we can plan as much as we want, but something will always happen. Something will always, I don't want to say go wrong, but like some kind of happening will occur that we'll have to work around. So, and that takes a skilled hand. And for me, as somebody that does not like talking to people generally, I'm very glad that we have project managers that can have those, because they're tough conversations, right? Like there's a way that you have to approach those conversations with your stakeholders, with your SMEs, clients. So, there's a tactfulness that I lack in a lot of that, self-admittedly. So I think that's a key thing to pull out, that is a skill that project managers need to have, is to be able to communicate effectively, but also, be empathetic and understand who they're talking to and how they need to approach them. So
there's definitely a balance there, of being, firm and straightforward, but also understanding and flexible where you can be. And, I usually just rely on my dazzling personality.
Flip the hair like you're in the soap operas. Yeah, fantastic.
But that's actually one of my, favorite parts of being a project manager, is the relationship building and kind of building that trust. And, not every conversation is one I'm going to look forward to, but I find that if you are, if you shoot it to people straight and you are, realistic, and you say, hey, this is what's going on, and these are our options. You always want to come with options if you can, and kind of let them figure it out. But you have to be tactful. You don't ever want to say, well, your team is the one that wasn't prepared, and now this is where we are. So I'm going to need you to, cough up some more dollars here, because we're going to have to change scope. No, we don't want to do that. But, that is a huge part of the project management. But so, I believe we were at after kickoff, right? Like what's next after that? All right. So let's say we've left a project kickoff. They've made their decisions. They've come to us and said, hey, we can commit to this many days as review times. We understand that if for every day that we are late for a review, it's going to impact the project this way. So, just, you don't want any surprises, and you do want everything documented. So that way, if you need to go back and refer to something, you can. So what I like to do is not only do you have a kickoff with the client to make sure you're aligned there, but we do a kickoff with our internal team too, our instructional designers. And I do that after the kickoff with the client, just because like I said, you learn a lot of things, some things change. I've made the mistake of trying to get ahead of it and do an ID kickoff before a stakeholder kickoff, and wound up right back in another ID kickoff meeting. So much. And so, we get make sure everyone's aligned, go over, what deliverables. We like to make sure our instructional design team knows everybody and each other. What I really love about, Lumius and how we operate is everyone is we're just such a cohesive team, and our IDs are very supportive, and you've got different people with different strengths, and people just tend to be very helpful with each other and provide guidance. And so it's just as important as building the relationship with the client as building your relationships internally, making sure that people feel supported, they know who to go to. They feel like if it's a new instructional designer, that they were onboarded well, they feel comfortable, that
Jeremy,
type of thing.
I'm starting to feel a little bit bad because I think a couple episodes ago we referred to project managers as nags, and Sarah is not describing the experience of that part of it. She is being very gentle.
I haven't gotten there yet.
We aren't nagging yet. That comes later.
Yeah.
It's
We're still in the honeymoon phase of the project.
Honeymoon phase. Absolutely. I'm your project manager. I'm here to support you.
Yeah.
We haven't gotten to the part where
I love you.
Excuse me, this is due 2 hours ago. Where is it? But you know what? I have to say, I've just been maybe I've just been really lucky, and every single idea I've ever worked with, it's been a great partnership. So I don't ever, I'm sure I've nagged at people. I try to be.
You've nagged
try to
me. What are you talking about?
Oh God, Tara. Absolutely. That doesn't count.
That's funny.
Yeah, it doesn't.
And it's interesting. I found out that each ID kind of reacts differently to that. Personally, nag me. That's great.
Exactly.
They have in fact forgotten. Please.
Absolutely.
I would rather you reach out and communicate and say, "Hey, this was due 2 hours ago, dude. What are you doing?" Oh crap. Yeah. Okay. Give me 3 hours. I'll get it over to you. But for me, I don't view it necessarily as nagging. I could see where if it was continuous, it may get to that, but that's not how I view it. Jokingly, that's what I call it, but that's not how I internalize it. So,
well, that kind of goes back to the importance of building your relationships internally, right? Not just between your IDs, but also the PM and the IDs. I want to make sure that my IDs know that it is a partnership. I'm not here to just delegate tasks and tell you when things are due. And it's a mutual respect, and just you've got to be flexible, and as much as you can be anyway. So for me, I also like to get to know my IDs, because to your point, Jeremy, I have some IDs that are they're insanely organized, way more than I'll ever be, even as the project manager. And they pretty much manage themselves. And they're, early with things every time. I don't have to say anything, right? And then you've got people that they prefer to, which is our job as a PM. They like to get their list of tasks that are going to be due that week. And if it's a big project and there are several deliverables happening at once, you got people building this over here and over there. And I like to make sure everybody knows, this is what you've got coming, even if it's not enough for me to create an entire list. I'm not going, our IDs have access to the smart sheets. Right? They know what they're assigned. All the due dates are there. And that's there so that we don't have to duplicate our efforts, right? And create a to-do list for every single person that week. But some of our IDs, they want a little bit more handholding, and I'm okay with that. If you're delivering good work and you're doing it on time, and this is the way that works best for you, cool. How can I support that? So
I do want to ask, so we've talked about like how you interact with your IDs, how you interact with your stakeholder and your SMEs. But one of the things that I find interesting from our point of view is there are usually two project managers on the project, right? Like there's you from the Lumius side, but then the client themselves usually also have a project manager on their end that's managing the project for, for the internal on that side. So walk us through kind of that relationship and how, like if you ever have to like butt heads or how that relationships work between the two project managers, because my assumption is while you both have the same end goal of getting this thing out, you may have other goals that might not align with that other project manager.
So at the end of the day, as project managers, it's our job to wrangle our own cats, if you will, right? So they're managing their folks internally. While I am managing my people internally, and where we come together a lot of times in my experience, that is one of the most important relationships to forge, right? And to nurture, if you will. Yeah. So a lot of times if we're doing our job well, the project manager from the client's end, they're truly just looking for us to inform them about where we are. Are there any roadblocks? Are there any, decisions that need to be made? And they have their work cut out for them, just like, I've got my work. And a lot of times it's even harder for them because they are managing across several different business, whether it's business units or groups or, senior leadership or, the SMEs, their job gets a little bit trickier, so I would say we've been pretty lucky, fortunate to have good working relationships with the project manager on the client side. And really it's just informing them, bringing things up when you need them to step in. And I mean, nothing's perfect. I have found that sometimes during a first phase or a first project, there can be some frustrations there, just different communication styles, different expectations. But you kind of work through those, you learn about each other. And then the next go round, you're even more prepared. You know what that project manager needs and what they're looking for and how they want to be supported.
Sarah, do you think too, as an internal project manager for one of our client companies or something, that they might even be in an awkward situation almost because they really don't have any authority over the SMEs, but they have to tell them what to do. And you kind of have to do that too. When you send reviews over and say, hey, we need that back in 3 days. I mean, who are you? Who's this woman telling me what to do? Why is she nagging me? I mean, do you see that as being a potential? So if you were a SME at a company and you're asked to go participate in this project, know this about your project manager. What would you tell them?
So I would say that it can be sometimes a difficult situation to be in because you don't have direct authority over anybody. But the way I like to handle that is I am very clear with the expectation and appreciative, SMEs, people that are putting all this work into the review cycles and providing us this information it's imperative to the success of the project, right? We are hugely reliant on these people. And so you always want to make sure that you are, I'm always very thankful and appreciative and When somebody goes above and beyond, I like to call that out. If, a lot of times we have SMEs that you can see they're sending things at like 7:30, 8 o'clock at night because they've probably been doing their day job all day until 5 or 6 p.m. and they didn't get to reviews until nighttime. And so I like to make sure I'm paying attention to that kind of thing, calling it out when we're on our weekly status meetings and we've got, the hires or the supervisors and their leaders. Just make sure that they know how grateful we are for their knowledge and for partnering with us and for getting us things on time. And no matter what, no matter how frustrated I can be or how many times maybe a SME isn't that great to work with, I never want to embarrass them or put them on the spot. Even then, I try to handle those situations with the project manager, just directly. A lot of times, if I'm noticing an issue, that project manager is noticing an issue too, and then I will kind of leave it in their hands to escalate accordingly or kind of figure that out. And then if push comes to shove and I've done everything I can to be, as flexible and accommodating as possible, and we're still not getting what we need, then I will say, look, this is where we are. We are now at a point where we are this far behind. This has now added this many days just to give everybody and even then, I will do it privately in an email, or I'll even say, hey, can we have a chat? I'll set up a call with me and the project manager or whoever, maybe even their leader. I've done that before as well. Reached out to a manager if I felt like we had that relationship and said, I just want to, talk about, I think that this person is feeling overwhelmed. I think they're experiencing burnout. Maybe you have another resource that you can throw at this. I'm happy to partner with another person. Like, let's figure this out together. So it's always about, trying to find a solution together and not coming across as too abrasive or, telling clients, well, I think you should do this, or, letting them just kind of work through it. But of course, there's always going to be some uncomfortable situations that come up. And
because sometimes it has nothing to do with the project. I mean,
absolutely.
You have no idea what's going on. So it's like, approach it positively and see what's going on, what's happening type of thing. Right.
And, sometimes SMEs are just, they don't have buy-in into the project that they're supporting. And that's really,
that's absolutely important. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's where I think you get those situations where we found ourselves, Jeremy, you and I on projects where the SME is not, they don't agree with the strategy. They don't think that this particular content is good for e-learning or asynchronous learning, or what I mean? Like they're so used to doing it a certain way. And, some SMEs, they've been doing it for 20, 30 years. Like if it ain't broke, don't fix it, so you've got to, it's, getting their confidence and buy-in too. And so it's just, that can make things a little bit more difficult, and you get through it eventually, but it can take time, and sometimes it has nothing to do with
and we're coming up close to our end time. But I will say that's a fantastic segue into our next episode. Episode 5 is essentially all going to be around that communication, how to build that rapport, what happens when that rapport breaks down, kind of some tips and tricks to really dig deeper and building those better working relationships between everybody we've highlighted. So between your IDs, your project managers, your stakeholders, your SMEs, everybody. So I will say we're coming up close to time. Is there anything else? And I'll put you on the spot here at the end. What's your walk away thing that you want our listeners to go, okay, this is what I remember about being a project manager, working with project managers. Within FCC regulations, you have carte blanche. What do you want to make sure people understand?
So I will say the one thing that I didn't get to touch on a whole lot is just visibility and making sure that you are keeping everybody along on the journey throughout from start to finish. And there are, minimal surprises, and trying to get ahead of things when you notice they're starting to veer off course. So one of the most, just important things about being a project manager is making sure that you are doing everything you can to give the visibility that you need to give to the right people. And that can look different for different people, different clients. We have, dashboards set up that, flow from our project plan and smart sheets into a nice, beautiful, fancy dashboard where anybody can just click on a link and go check on it anytime they want to. Sometimes that doesn't work well for people. They want a bulleted list of this is where we are, this is what's coming next, this is what's due. And I try to accommodate that for our clients if that's what they want. And a lot of times I have found that the best way to do that is a weekly status email, and just being, finding that balance, just like an instructional designer, of including the important parts that are unnecessary, and then trying to maybe link out some of the more wordy or detailed stuff that they can find other places. Yeah, that's so important. And so if I was going to say anything about just, working with a project manager and the life of a project manager is it's building the relationship, maintaining those relationships, building that trust, it's so important for the health of a project. And then just making sure that everyone is along on that journey. And when something comes up, or even if it hasn't happened yet, but things are starting to veer towards a certain direction, making sure that, you're ringing that alarm and saying, hey guys, we're not here yet, but
right,
if we continue this way, this is where we could find ourselves.
Awesome. All right.
Come to my house, Sarah, because right now, while we're trying to do this, there's a cat trying to get into my office. So if you could come herd that cat for me.
Yeah, that's right. On that note, we'll call it. Thanks everybody for listening, for watching. We'll be back in a little bit. Like I said, we'll be talking through the whole communication piece. So appreciate it. Thanks, Sarah. Thanks for joining us.